Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through the energy sector and pipelines. Now, the agenda that I'm basically going to do, I'm going to talk about imports and exports because that's critical in terms of driving trade, foreign direct investment. I'll talk about leading countries where we import oil. I'll also talk about oil shipments by rail pipeline. I'll talk about the financial impact of the oil sector in terms of the pipelines, and I'll talk about new pipelines or just what's going on in terms of the activity. So let's talk about imports and exports because this drives trade. Exports are a critical driver of GDP in Canada because Canada depends on exports. This chart's basically showing you from rig counts from as far back as October 2014 up to the current year. Now, you hear a lot of rhetoric going around about trade deficits, and it's very critical to understand oil's a good portion of our exports, and it's a key area that we should be driving in terms of our exports out to countries like China and to Europe that helps reduce that trade deficit down. Despite what the Liberal Party and other opposition parties have said in the past, you have to be able to expand export opportunities, and oil is one of those areas that you can expand. Let's talk about basically the top importers. Right over to the right hand side you see Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Algeria, Norway, Angola. Now I've also included the human rights rankings. This is critical. So as much as people seem to hate the bitumen that's coming from Alberta or the offshore oil coming from Newfoundland and discussions in Nova Scotia, the critical aspect is we're importing oil from countries that human rights records and abuses are very much up in the air in terms of how they handle people. So people are all against the oil in Canada, but they don't take a look at where we're importing from. And that's something you need to bear in mind. Now, the bulk of all oil still moves by pipelines. There is significant oil that's moved by rail. Rail is more dangerous. There's more apt to see stuff like Lake Mekotik happen, and that's something you need to bear in mind. That the oil will still go east into the refineries, but it'll go by rail, and that's more dangerous. And that seems to be being ignored by Kathleen Wynne and Philippe Couillard. They seem to not to do this, and that's something you need to bear in mind as well. This shows you the impact in billions of dollars. So on a corporate tax perspective, yes, it's a small amount, but it's still $200 million that goes into that bucket that helps pay for things like healthcare and education. Okay. On top of that, it also pays into CPP, EI, and supports other aspects of basically CPP is invested in terms of investments and returns. So it's supporting other aspects. These workers actually work as part of the wages. They're in there. They spend money into the community. That's not discussed. And that's something you need to bear in mind as well. Now, I've just put this thing up so you can see some links. 99% of the oil, that's a pretty good track record that moves without issues. And that's never discussed by any sort of environmental group because they don't like to discuss the good stuff. Now, what is the issue at hand here? Well, there's a lot of rhetoric going around on these pipelines being approved and stuff like that because it's being moved by the Agenda 21 and the pro-green movement. What's ending up happening is here, you're actually hurting the economy. Alberta and Saskatchewan, through their royalty and other money, throw this money to a bucket called equalization. That equalization helps the have-not provinces provide equal level of support because they don't have the revenue. Ontario and Quebec are get significant money from equalization. Same with Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So if Alberta doesn't perform well, guess what happens? That's less money for equalization. That's more pressure on those governments to raise taxes. This has nothing to do about GHG. This is all about revenue. The GHG issue is mitigated in most cases, and it's overstated. But it's more about these people playing politics versus looking at what's best for the country. Now, this is a quick presentation on oil pipelines because I really want to highlight this. But the critical aspect here, if you're going to expand exports, then you need to add capacity. And that means pipelines need to be built. All parties need to be involved with this, but the rhetoric that these guys are putting around is not about necessarily the environment, it's about money. It's always been about money, but you're never going to hear that. The reason why is because they can put the political spin on it, because they're trying to save seats, they're trying to do politics. What they're not doing is looking for the best interest of the country as a whole. If one province does well, like Alberta and Saskatchewan, everybody benefits. And that's something that's not discussed by the media. Thank you.